Welcome to a chilling story where darkness and unexplained disappearances intertwine in an endless nightmare. Today, we will dive into a real-life mystery, retold with a horror twist that perhaps only Stephen King could write. This is the story of Cindy Song, a college student who vanished on Halloween night in 2001 without a trace, without an explanation. Perhaps she was pulled into another world, a place none of us would ever want to step foot in. Make sure the lights in your room are on, and that you're not alone as you listen to this story. Ready? Let's begin. Chapter 1. The Last Halloween Night. The festive atmosphere filled Penn State University as music from Halloween parties echoed from the dorm buildings. Flickering jack-o'-lanterns sat on every doorstep, their eerie smiles taunting anyone brave enough to pass by. Cindy Song, dressed adorably as a white rabbit, walked lightly across the street, her bunny ears bouncing with each step. She smiled brightly, but there was a fleeting hint of unease in her eyes. Halloween night was usually a chance for Cindy to escape the pressures of school and the worries of student life. But tonight, there was a strange feeling that followed her, a sensation she couldn't quite explain. At first, she thought maybe she was just tired or that the chill of the late autumn night was making her more sensitive. But as her eyes scanned the people around her at the party, something didn't feel right, like a pair of invisible eyes were watching her. Yet, when she turned around, no one was there. The feeling passed quickly, but it was enough to send a shiver down her spine. Her friends were fully absorbed in the party, oblivious to the growing unease creeping into Cindy. She kept smiling, trying to stay cheerful, but an inner voice whispered, warning her that something wasn't right. Still, there was no real reason to worry. This was just another Halloween night, right? By the end of the party, Cindy decided to head home early. Her friends walked her back to her apartment, where the faint light of the hallway cast shadows on the walls like a gloomy mist. Thanks, guys. See you tomorrow. Cindy smiled and waved as the door to her apartment closed behind her. For a moment, the apartment was silent as she stood there, keys still in hand. The small, familiar space felt unusually cold tonight, a chill she couldn't quite shake. She tossed her keys into the dish by the door and stepped into the living room. The dim light from the hallway streamed through the window, casting a beam onto the corner of a mirror. Cindy stopped in her tracks. The mirror, wasn't it unbroken before? A long, jagged crack now stretched across the middle, as if someone had sliced through it with an invisible blade. She stood there for a few seconds, her mind racing with illogical explanations. Maybe it had broken earlier, and she hadn't noticed. Or maybe she was just too drunk to remember. Yeah, that must be it. Cindy headed into her bedroom, peeling off her bunny costume and tossing it onto a chair. The chills still clung to her, like the room was hiding something unseen, always watching her every move. She shook her head, trying to push the thought away, and wrapped herself in her blanket. But sleep didn't come easily. The darkness enveloped the apartment, leaving only the faint sound of wind rustling through the window. Cindy closed her eyes, but opened them again when she heard a faint sound, something like footsteps just outside her bedroom door. She sat up, her heart pounding. She listened carefully, but everything was silent. It's just your imagination, she told herself. But the fear kept growing, as if the darkness in the room was draining the life out of her. Suddenly, a soft knock echoed from the living room door. Cindy shot up, trembling all over. Who would come at this hour? She slowly walked to the door, the hallway light seeping through the crack beneath it. She cracked the door open and peeked through the peephole. No one was there, but as she closed the door, she felt something or someone standing right behind her, just a step away. Cindy spun around, but the room was empty, filled only with darkness. That was the last time anyone saw Cindy Song alive. Chapter 2. The Invisible Shadows. The next morning, pale sunlight filtered through the trees at Penn State, but it brought no warmth. The entire campus seemed wrapped in a thin veil of mist, as if the atmosphere itself sensed an invisible emptiness. No one realized that the night before, a student had mysteriously vanished. No one, except Cindy's closest friends. It all began when Katie, One of Cindy's friends from the Halloween party called her in the morning to invite her to breakfast. The phone rang 4 times, but no one picked up. Katie frowned, but figured Cindy might be sleeping in after a long night of partying. By noon, when no one had heard from Cindy, Katie started to worry. Katie, along with 2 other friends, Mike and Lisa, decided to head straight to Cindy's apartment. They had been there many times before, but this time, something felt different. Cindy's apartment, usually filled with laughter and light, now stood eerily quiet, as cold as a lifeless painting. Mike rang the doorbell, but there was no response. After several minutes of knocking with no answer, they decided to call the landlord. When the door finally opened, a cold draft swept over them, as if the apartment had been frozen in time. The room was tidy, with no sign of disturbance. Cindy's phone lay on the kitchen table, no messages, no missed calls. Her backpack hung neatly on the coat rack, her shoes still by the door. But strangely, her wallet and keys were missing. Lisa, who was the closest to Cindy, tried calling the police, but her mind kept spinning with unanswerable questions. The apartment felt small, but at the same time vast and empty, as if all sounds were swallowed up by the thick walls. Katie felt like something was off, but couldn't put her finger on it. Everything looked normal, but the air was heavy with a sense of unease. Lisa made her way to the bedroom, where weak light filtered through the window and the thin curtains. She didn't say a word as she stepped in, but suddenly, she froze. The mirror on the wall had a long crack running from top to bottom. The crack wasn't large, but it evoked a sense of dread, as if it didn't belong there. Lisa stepped back, her breathing quickening, her hands trembling. Mike and Katie rushed in behind her, all 3 staring at the mirror. A chill filled the room. The mirror wasn't just a regular object. It was like a window leading to somewhere else, or something that had come from the other side. "We need to call the police now," Mike said, his voice shaky, unlike his usual self. They knew this was no longer a harmless prank or Cindy playing a joke. When the police arrived, the apartment was sealed off and became a missing persons crime scene. The officers searched every corner, looking for clues, but found nothing unusual. There were no signs of a struggle or break-in, no strange fingerprints, no evidence that Cindy had been abducted. This only heightened their fear. If Cindy hadn't left on her own, how had she disappeared? The lead investigator, Detective Daniel Hayes, had handled many missing person cases before, but this one unsettled him from the start. There were no traces, only emptiness. Yet, something else caught his attention: the statements from Cindy's friends. Katie, Mike, and Lisa all mentioned that Cindy had felt someone was watching her the night before she vanished. All 3 had sensed something off in the apartment. Katie even described feeling like something had been staring at her from the corner of the room when they arrived that morning. Detective Hayes stood before the cracked mirror, staring at it. The fracture looked like a rift leading to a place where light couldn't reach. A quiet unease crept into his mind, sending a shiver down his spine, but he brushed it off, telling himself it was just his imagination. However, he couldn't shake the feeling that Cindy's song hadn't just vanished. Something or someone had taken her, and it was still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting. Chapter 3: The Rabbit Hole. A week had passed since Cindy's song's disappearance. Penn State was no longer a place of laughter and joy. The campus was shrouded in a shadow of worry and fear. People whispered strange rumors about whispers in the wind, about a peculiar chill they felt when passing by Cindy's apartment. Despite the police search, there were no clues leading them closer to the truth. The rumors spread, as though the small town was swallowing its own fear. Some claimed Cindy had been abducted by a mysterious figure lurking in the dark, stalking female students late at night. But a small group of people, Lisa, Mike, and Katie among them, believed something else, something far more terrifying. They had heard of a legend, something rarely spoken about: the Black Rabbit. Katie had come across the story on an obscure website dedicated to supernatural tales. According to it, the Black Rabbit was an enigmatic entity that appeared on Halloween nights. It wasn't just an ordinary creature. It was a hunter, seeking out lost souls, the weak and the vulnerable, to drag them into its world, the rabbit hole, a twisted space where time lost meaning and no one could escape. At first, Lisa dismissed it as just another creepy folklore meant to scare children. But after what happened to Cindy, she couldn't ignore it. The strange feeling had lingered ever since Cindy disappeared, as if the darkness around her had grown heavier. Deeper, she began having bizarre dreams. Dreams about Cindy. In those dreams, Cindy was wearing her white rabbit costume, running through a dark forest. But every time Lisa called her name, Cindy would turn around, her eyes empty, soulless, before being pulled into an invisible hole in the ground. The dreams haunted Lisa for days, so much so that she shared them with Katie and Mike. At first, both thought Lisa was just too stressed. But when Katie admitted she had felt as if something was watching her, the three began to realize they might have overlooked something important. One night, they decided to return to Cindy's apartment to search for more clues. The police had finished their investigation, and the apartment now sat abandoned, cold, like a haunted house. The three friends stepped into the room. The silence was overwhelming, as though every sound was being swallowed by the apartment itself. They started searching for any signs the police might have missed. Everything was as they had last seen it: the kitchen, the living room, and a strange cracked mirror. Lisa stood in front of the mirror, that unsettling feeling creeping up on her again, as if something was hiding within it. Mike turned and noticed Lisa trembling. "What's wrong?" Mike asked. Lisa pointed at the mirror. "I don't know, but something isn't right. Can't you see it?" Mike stared at the crack, but saw nothing unusual. "No, it's just a broken mirror." But Katie, standing behind them, suddenly stepped forward. "Wait," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You mentioned the rabbit hole? If the story is real, then there has to be a rabbit hole somewhere, right?" The three stood in silence for a moment, pondering the crazy idea. Then, Lisa suddenly knelt down, feeling the floorboards beneath her feet. "Here, something feels off." They started checking the floor, when Mike pulled up one of the wooden planks. All three froze in shock. Beneath the floor was a small, deep, pitch-black hole. It was like a bottomless abyss, and cold air seeped up from below, sending chills through their bodies. "Oh my God," Lisa gasped, stepping back, her heart racing. Katie knelt down, trying to peer into the hole, but the darkness seemed to stretch on forever. It could be the rabbit hole. Cindy might be in there. "We can't," Mike stammered, his voice shaking. "We have to find her," Lisa insisted, gripping Katie's shoulder for courage. They decided to lower a flashlight into the hole, using a rope, but nothing touched the bottom. This hole couldn't be easily explained by science or reality. It seemed like a gateway to somewhere else, a place no one should enter. As they stood there, the flashlight beam faded into the blackness, and a strange sound echoed from deep within the hole, like the faint sound of someone laughing. The laughter was soft, like the wind, but it was haunting, freezing them in place, unable to move. "Cindy," Lisa called out, her voice shaking with desperation. But instead of hearing Cindy's voice, a cold gust of air blew out from the hole, making all three shudder. The group knew they had touched something they were never meant to find. The rabbit hole wasn't just a story. It was a doorway to a dark place where Cindy had been pulled. And now, it seemed like something or someone was waiting for them on the other side. Chapter 4: The Watcher in the Shadows. After the strange discovery of the rabbit hole, the group of friends left Cindy's apartment in silence. The darkness of Cindy's apartment lingered in their minds, as if the cold air and the faint sounds from the hole had followed them out. That night, none of them could sleep. In their own rooms, Katie, Mike, and Lisa lay awake, haunted by terrifying images and an unbearable feeling of being watched. Lisa was the first to feel it most clearly. She vaguely remembered the dream of Cindy in her white rabbit costume, her empty, soulless eyes running through a dark forest. But this time, the dream was sharper. Lisa was no longer standing by, watching from afar. She was running after Cindy, desperately calling her name. Cindy's footsteps were fast and frantic, but there was another set of footsteps behind Lisa. Someone, or something, was following her. Lisa woke up with a start, sweat pouring down her forehead, her heart racing. The room was pitch black, but something felt different. A strange coldness, like it came from another world, filled her room. For a moment, she heard a faint sound, a light scratching, barely audible, coming from the window. "No way," she whispered, fear crashing over her like a tidal wave. Lisa couldn't move, her heart pounding in her chest as if it would explode. She didn't want to look at the window. She didn't want to see whatever was waiting there. But curiosity and fear forced her to do it. Slowly, she turned her head and stared at her window. Something was standing there, on the outside, a faint figure, taller than a normal person, as if its shadow had stretched unnaturally long. The figure stood motionless, and its eyes burning red like embers, stared directly at her from outside the glass. Lisa screamed, the sound echoing through the apartment. But when she jumped up and ran to the window, the figure was gone. The window was completely empty, with no sign of what she had just seen. Her whole body trembled, her breathing rapid. Deep down, she knew the black rabbit had found her. It wasn't just Lisa. Katie and Mike also started experiencing strange phenomena. Katie began hearing soft footsteps trailing behind her whenever she walked down quiet hallways. At first, she tried to convince herself it was all in her head, but each night the footsteps grew louder, heavier. One night, when Katie turned around, she saw Cindy's figure flicker in the streetlight, still wearing the white rabbit costume. "Cindy!" Katie shouted, running toward the figure, but when she reached it, Cindy had vanished into the fog. Only a faint, eerie laugh lingered in the air, making Katie feel as if she were being toyed with by some invisible force. Even Mike, usually the most skeptical of the group, could no longer deny the supernatural presence haunting them. One evening, while sitting alone in his apartment, Mike saw Cindy's silhouette standing in the middle of his living room. She didn't speak, just stood there, staring at him. But her eyes, they weren't Cindy's eyes anymore. They were empty, pitch black, like endless voids leading to a distant place Mike never wanted to explore. "Cindy, is that you?" Mike whispered, not believing what he was seeing. But moments later, Cindy's figure began to fade, dissolving into the air. Mike didn't dare move, terror gripping him as he realized they were facing something far beyond human comprehension. When the group reunited, all three trembled as they recounted what they had experienced. It was clearer than ever. Not only had Cindy been taken by the black rabbit, but now they, too, were its targets. The supernatural shadow had noticed their interference and had begun to haunt them, plaguing their dreams, following their every step. "I think we opened a door we were never meant to open," Mike said, his voice grim. "We've awakened something." Lisa nodded, fear in her eyes. "The black rabbit, it's watching us." Katie sighed, defeated. "We can't go on like this. We have to find a way to bring Cindy back, or at least make this stop." But they all knew it wouldn't be easy. The black rabbit wasn't just a myth. It was a real entity lurking in the shadows, a hunter of lost souls. And now, the group of friends had been dragged into its deadly game, a game whose outcome no one could predict. Chapter 5, Gone Forever. Desperation crept into every thought of Lisa, Katie, and Mike. They all knew that they had been pulled into something far bigger and more terrifying than they could ever imagine. The black rabbit wasn't just a supernatural shadow, it was a predator, and now they had become its prey. Each night, the feeling of being watched, of being stalked, grew heavier. They knew they had to confront this or they'd never escape. Katie was the first to suggest, "We have to go back to Cindy's apartment. If the rabbit hole is really a gateway to wherever she was taken, then we have to face it at its source." The group understood that it was their only choice. Their existence had been twisted by this supernatural horror, and only by facing the darkness could they end it all. On a cold winter night, the three friends gathered in front of Cindy's apartment, which now looked like an abandoned house, deserted in the middle of the city. The wind howled through the bare branches, creating scratching sounds like the claws of some creature clinging to the surface of this world. They stood silently at the door, giving each other one last glance before stepping inside. Inside the apartment, everything remained as they had left it. The mirror, with its long, ominous crack, hung coldly on the wall, like a pair of hidden eyes watching them from the darkness. Mike approached the hole in the floor that they had discovered earlier. No longer as afraid as the first time, they knew that if there were any answers, they were down there. "Pull it up," Mike said, his voice shaky but determined. They carefully lifted the floorboard again, and once more, the dark hole appeared before them. The cold air from within rose up, heavy and oppressive. But this time, the hole felt different. The darkness below was no longer just a void. It was deeper, like an abyss, and faint whispers echoed from below, like a wicked invitation from another world. Katie knelt down, staring into the darkness. "We don't have any other choice. Cindy, she might still be down there." Lisa shook her head, trying to stay calm. "But if we go down, we might never come back." Mike, standing near the edge of the hole, took a deep breath. "If we do nothing, it won't just take Cindy, it'll take us too. It's already started. I can feel it." The three stood on the brink of a decision they never thought they'd have to make. They had come to find Cindy, but now they realized that entering this rabbit hole might mean they would disappear forever. With newfound determination, Katie took a flashlight and lowered it into the hole. The beam flickered and then vanished into the darkness, offering no clue as to how deep it went. But then something strange happened. The light reappeared, reflecting off the walls as though someone or something down there had picked it up and was shining it back. And then, Cindy's voice echoed from the darkness. "Katie, Lisa, Mike, help me." They froze. Cindy's voice wasn't a hallucination. It was clear, real, and full of fear. Her voice trembled, as though she was trapped in some distant place no one could imagine. "Cindy!" Lisa screamed, staring into the hole as if she could see her friend down there. "I'm here," Cindy's voice called again. But this time, something was off. It sounded distorted, stretched, as though someone or something was mimicking her. All three friends knew that something down there was trying to pull them in. Cindy might still be alive, but something darker, more dangerous, was waiting for them below the rabbit hole. It wasn't just a gateway to another world. It was a trap. "We can't go down there," Mike whispered, his eyes wide with fear. That's not Cindy anymore." Katie backed away, her voice weak. "But what if it really is her?" There was no time to hesitate. The darkness from the hole began to spill out, thick and suffocating, as though the shadows were alive and ready to devour them. And then the laughter started, a sound they had heard before, the soft laughter of the black rabbit. "Run!" Mike shouted, grabbing Lisa and Katie as they bolted out of the apartment. They slammed the door behind them as they fled. Inside the apartment, the laughter echoed, as if the black rabbit knew they couldn't escape forever. The darkness it had cast over them would continue to follow, slowly but surely, until it claimed them all. Years later, on Halloween nights, people still say they've seen Cindy Song, a girl in a white rabbit costume, wandering the empty streets, her soulless eyes gazing at the houses, as if searching for something or someone. No one knows exactly what happened to Cindy and her friends. But one thing is certain, the black rabbit is still out there, waiting for its next victim. And that was the story of Cindy Song's mysterious disappearance. Was she taken by a supernatural force? Or are we simply haunted by our invisible fears of the unexplainable? Sometimes, the best answers are the ones that are never found, because the truth lies beyond what the human mind can comprehend. Remember, as Halloween approaches, when darkness falls and faint laughter echoes from afar, maybe Cindy, or whatever took her, is still out there, searching for those who might wander into their own rabbit hole. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to follow the channel so you won't miss the next chilling story. See you in the dark.